And we're back. We just got our NSX Manager appliances deployed. Let's talk about the user interface for just a couple of minutes so that everything's pretty straightforward. Everything's pretty laid out for you. So we're going to talk about a couple of different flavors of the user interface that we have. One is our policy UI, and the other is the manager UI. And so these are the two different roles that we have available in the management plane. And we've got slightly different UIs for both of them. Now, most of the time, we're going to work with the policy UI. Right? We're not going to worry so much about the manager UI, except in some very specific use cases. And the manager UI, the use case for that is really for infrastructures, for NSX domains where I have maybe a cloud management platform that still primarily uses the manager APIs instead of the policy APIs. Almost everything else is going to be done through the policy user interface and the policy APIs. So we're going to work with that. This is going to be our default user interface. And in many cases, you may not even see this toggle up in the upper right hand of your screen where you can choose between policy and manager. It may simply not be there because we don't enable that by default. We can turn on that toggle if we so desire under the system menu. If we go down to system settings or general settings, there is a user interface tab where we can go in and edit the user interface. And the edit here is simply editing whether or not we want to show that policy versus manager toggle. We can change that. We can choose what users can see that toggle, whether it's enterprise administrator users only or all users. And we can choose what the default setting is, whether the default UI is the policy UI or the manager UI, right? And if we look through these, we see some differences. There's some pretty notable differences actually at this point between the policy UI that we're going to work with throughout the rest of this class and the manager UI, which is there simply for, in our purposes here, for exploratory reasons. We're going to see that in the networking UI, we have our network topology view, we have segments, we have gateways. Those are all policy terms rather than manager terms. And those reflect that desired state context that we're looking at in policy. The manager UI, by contrast, is going to show us here logical switches and logical routers and those building blocks that we're going to use to create those desired states. In the security tab, we're going to see quite a few more capabilities in policy than in manager. Many of the security tools that we've added in, the distributed intrusion detection and prevention system, the malware prevention system, and so on. Those tools are available in the policy UI. They are not available in the manager UI. Our manager UI has access to our gateway firewalls and our distributed firewall, as well as network introspection and partner introspection, our third-party integrations. The inventory tab in policy has a few more things in it, containers and some other things there, just some newer features and capabilities that we have added in since we started using the policy engine in, NSXT 2.4, I believe. So it's been a little while now. But again, manager is still there. We can still work with some objects in manager. Under the Plan and Troubleshoot tab, there's certainly more capability in the Policy UI because Plan and Troubleshoot, this top header, is where we can look at NSX intelligence, right? Our discover and take action or our recommendations. Those are all NSX intelligence links to take us to the NSX intelligence user interface. That doesn't exist in the Manager UIs at all. But Manager does still have things like IPFix and TraceFlow and some of the other troubleshooting capabilities that we might have in the in policy as well. Now, finally, if we look at the system tab is pretty straightforward. There's no difference between policy and manager here. There's one system UI. There's one set of tools for managing the the system, the NSX system itself, and all of its settings. So I don't have to worry about a toggle between policy and manager there. When it all comes down to it, we're going to use the policy UI for almost everything. At this point, there's very little reason, except, again, in those very specific use cases I talked about a minute ago, there are very specific reasons to use the Manager UI, but only those specific reasons. Everything else we're going to do is going to be in the context of the policy user interface. And so that's where we're going to spend most of our time. Now, let's think about some labs. Now that you've kind of seen a little bit about the UI, let's think about the labs. But before I start talking about the labs, let's jump over to this other video from my friend Tim describing and talking about how to work with the lab environment. This is going to be good stuff. So go kick into that video, come back. We'll talk about the labs here specifically and kick you into those shortly. So let's go spend a couple of minutes with Tim.
Hi there. Tim Burkhardt here from VMware Learning. I'm a staff technical instructor with VMware Learning, and I'm here to introduce you and kind of do a little demonstration of what takes place in an on-demand class for the VMware Learning platform that we use for our labs. I want to show you a couple little hints and tricks and help you to navigate around. First step, of course, is that we need to go in and find our lab. Now, obviously, you're watching this video, so you've already experienced part of your on-demand course. So you know that you reach the on-demand content and view the videos and examine your book and all that. But there's another link. It's the on-demand lab link. And so I'm going to go ahead and click that here. Now, the lab I'm showing you is the NSXT Data Center Install, Configure, and Manage lab. But it works the same way in your lab as it does in this particular lab. So you click on the link and you look and go, well, I think it's time. I should get started. And so you click the Get Started link, and there's your on-demand lab. And so you go ahead and start that particular lab. Oh, looky there. My pop-up is enabled, pop-up blocker. So I've got to go ahead and click the link so that Customer Connect Learning can actually open up my lab environment. I want to bring to your attention, Virtual Lab Assistance is added to your on-demand lab. There's a virtual assistant up there. We'll look at that. We'll actually try it a little bit later. Now, the first thing that I want you to notice is I'm starting my lab. You're starting your lab. The lab is starting. And it's been 24 seconds so far. As I talk, there's now, 10 more seconds going on. And it could take, it's spinning up your entire virtualized environment, multiple virtual servers and multiple virtual machines within those virtual servers. We're going to see in a little while as that thing gets ready, we will see the lab actually get started. In the meantime, I'll just point out a little bit while it's working, and eventually we'll just pause and wait for it to finish. But I want to show you the fact that your lab manual is already loaded. Now, the lab manual is, it's your lab guide. And you can see in this particular lab, it's a page 140 pages long. We're on page 1 right now. And if we use the navigation button, you can advance the lab to the next one. You get the credits and the copyright information stuff, and then instruction to on-demand. It could take as long as 30 minutes to finish starting. Well, I'm not going to make you sit through it that long. We'll pause this video in a moment and continue when it finishes, but I can still show you a little bit. There's a chat with support option, and that'll help you get with a person if you have issues. Get with a live person in normal business hours to answer. Now, the lab manual itself, you do have the ability to increase the font size, decrease the font size. You can navigate through page by page, but there's some other ways you can navigate too. You can get into the table of contents. The table of contents, if you open the lab up and you go, I've done so much of this. Oh, wait, there's that simulation. I want to do that again. You can quickly jump to any lab in your environment. As I scroll down and I say, I want to look at deploying virtual private networks. So I click on that one and you see the screen changed in the manual to deploying virtual private networks. So that's a way you can navigate about on the more options. There is another option too. The lab manual is sitting here right now docked to the right side of the screen. Maybe I want it on the left side. Maybe I'm left-handed and I prefer the lab is over there. You've got that option, that choice. Or you can even float it and have it out there someplace in the middle, and you still have the navigation screens available to you. But even more modern, if you would, is you can go to split screen. Now, you see there's a QR code. So if you're running a tablet, you could shoot the QR code, or your phone, shoot the QR code, and you'd have the lab guide on another screen. What I like to do, because I have two monitors, is take the link. And if I open that link in a new tab or a new private window, it actually opened up on my other monitor. Let me drag it over here so you can see it. Oh, it looks just like the other one did. Yes, it does, right? It actually picked up right where I was and opened that thing up. Nice. I think so too. I'm going to get rid of that now. And let's talk about what we can look at under help. Well, you've got the support options that are available. Test your speed. To check the link, click that and it'll go to a testing environment to estimate my speed. Let me try. I don't know how good my speed is. I think it's pretty good, but let's check. It also checks the cloud latency and the VLP latency. Okay. We're within less than 100 milliseconds. We'll probably be all right with 115 megabits per second. Let's try the test. It checks the cloud latency and examines the speed. Whoa, man, it jumped way up. I like that. We want to be less than 300 milliseconds, and a good speed is greater than 1.5 megabits per second. Well, I think we reached all those. So that's a good test that we have, in fact, concluded. We can also, EDU lab support can be used as an email to help along the way as well. You also got this message that chance support is available. I'm going to click on more for that, and we can go right to the lab assistant under virtual support. Okay. There I am. Hi guys. That's me. Any changes that are there? That's my profile. We can change our language at any time. And now when I click on help, we've got the tips that are available that allow us to jump in, define any course that you have, and you can show any tips after login as well. And we get into our lab, which isn't yet started. So I am going to tell you one more thing, and then we're going to pause until the lab gets all the way started. Okay, the one more thing is, that thing's in the way. I've been going 6 minutes. I still don't have my lab manual. Look where the lab manual went. It docked itself to the last side that you had the screen on. I'm used to having it on the right side. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And now, although it says 6 minutes and 10 seconds left, frankly, friends, I'm not going to wait that long or make you wait that long. So I'll just pause and we'll resume as soon as the lab gets started up. One really nice thing about doing the pause, even though I've been gone for about 8 minutes, it doesn't seem like it. But when it opens up, when your lab opens up, a couple things pop up. One of the first things that pop up is this center window right here. And that is your lab window. That's really where you're going to be doing the 95% of your work and maybe more, 100% of your work. And it is a Windows desktop. It's a main console that we're working with here. And you see the lab status icon that's listed down at the bottom. It says lab status 1154 starting VMs. So it's getting those VMs running up. There's a lot. Look at this one. This is specific to the course. Every course has its own set of consoles, its own set of virtual machines. Now this one, all these virtual machines, frankly, it includes the student desktop. We call this a student desktop. Okay. The student desktop is what we're looking at. But if I wanted to look at one of my ESXi hosts, for example, I could click on an ESXi host and it'll load up that ESXi console. I am now loaded into that ESXi console. And if I click in there, I could actually hit the F2 icon and see the root, the login. If I had need to reboot or restart one of my ESXi hosts, I have console access. And that's part of the ESXi console that's available within the lab environment. The NSX Manager and vCenter server are also set up in this particular lab as their own console. They aren't incorporated within the student desktop where we have a vCenter server loaded. See, still starting VM, so I don't want to get too far in advance here. But again, now we have our console running. The next thing you should probably do is minimize that. You really don't need it. The vast majority of what you're going to do is sitting right inside this student desktop console. So that's probably where you're going to do your work. Now, one of the things that you can do is, and I prefer to do this, watch what happens when I drag this window. I like to have more screen real estate. So I drag that window up and it can automatically adjust the size of your window. There you go. See, I clicked in there and it made it adjust its size. So it'll adjust its size basically to the size you give the console. Now it's still starting some VMs. So I would expect at this point a little bit of, functionality interest thing. It's got a timer up here. Now it's going to tell you how many days you've got left. Apparently you get 30 days and an hour. That extra hour is to get your lab started up. So we got our lab started. Now we're waiting for pings. You can follow along the console. Waiting for pings, testing TCP ports to make sure that the consoles can communicate with one another. And that's what we're waiting for. Hot dog. Today is August 15th, as you may have guessed. And it's about noontime Pacific Coast time. And so my lab is ready to go. Now, I want to show you a couple other things. With your F11, you could get rid of any of your shortcut bars or whatever. You can go full screen and maximize this. You can go full screen in your browser if you want, to give yourself as much screen real estate as you could possibly need. Now, I'm going to click on the Chrome icon. So many of our labs are written for the Chrome icon. And sure enough, you get a what's new. That's fairly common in our lab to see the latest version or what was the latest version at the time of Chrome. But another thing I want you to be aware of, if I am logging in to our, vCenter in this case, or if I go to the NSX console and log in to the NSX console. I'm going to log into both so you can see them. But one thing that I've noticed when I've been working in our labs is that I often don't have as much screen real estate as I'd like. Well, I can go to a floating window, or I could go to maximize, as I showed you earlier, or I could place in center. Let me just maximize. I still have to scroll up and down. And that's a little bit, sometimes frankly, annoying. So, little ellipses, vertical ellipses in the upper right-hand corner of Chrome and its 3 lines in Firefox offers you a zoom. And if you zoom back out a little bit, you might be able to see enough of the screen. And especially it happens when there's pop-out screens. That happens. Sometimes you can't see. I know there's a few labs where you can't see the enter button or the click to save button. And by adjusting the zoom, you can. Now that's per tab. So if I go back to vCenter tab, that vCenter tab, well, he was originally at 90%, and maybe that's not big enough. Maybe you want to adjust it. You can adjust up or down on the fly as you need to get the best amount of screen real estate that you need to perform the functions you're looking for in your lab. Okay? So those items hopefully help you a little bit in understanding just exactly what your lab environment is going to look like. So I'll exit my Maximize, and the last thing I want to talk about, you got 30 days to do the lab. But there's an end button. Okay? Yeah, you be careful with that one. I'm glad it's kind of grayed out here. Okay? You really don't want to use that end button. It's okay to exit because when you come back, it'll bring you right back to where you were. But if you end, that's the end of the lab. That's the end of the class. So you want to kind of be careful with that. Last thing. This is, I promise, this is the last thing I'm going to talk about, is sending the text. What do you mean send text? Well, sometimes your keyboard doesn't always 100% take your keystrokes, but you can hit the send text and type your data into send text, and wherever the cursor is, send that text to your console. Sometimes that comes in real handy. Almost as handy as what occasionally will work is you can highlight in your lab guide, and when it turns into a hand, you can drag that to the cursor and it will paste it right into your lab. A couple little shortcuts there to assist you. All right, it's really your turn. Go back to your class and maybe jump into your lab and learn by doing. Thanks for taking the time with me. We'll see you in the next go around.
I love Tim. Tim is great. He's an awesome instructor and a good friend of mine. And he's got such a way describing the lab environment. Now, let's think about the labs we're going to do here in this class. So we're going to start off lab number one. Lab number one is simply kind of it's a reading lab. This is where we're going to look at, some key things about this set of labs that we're going to do, look at the topology we're going to build over the course of these labs, and kind of work through some of that. This is a real straightforward lab. There's not a lot to it. This is great. We're going to go from lab one directly into lab number two. Lab number two is exploratory in a different way, right? It's not so much reading as it is exploring the environment that we have prepared for you already. So we're going to look at vCenter. We're going to look at NSX. We're going to validate licensing on both of those. Your licenses should all be good, but we always want to find out earlier rather than later if perhaps somehow a license has expired or something's not right there. So we're just going to validate that. Nothing crazy here. And then we're going to go and explore the NSX command line, look at some of those command line tools, get cluster status and things like that, just to validate our NSX management cluster. And then very critically, we're going to register a vCenter server as a compute manager. We're going to need that for future labs. So that's what we're doing here in lab number two. When we're done with that, we'll go ahead and roll into a third lab. Now, this third lab is actually a simulation. We're going to, in this simulation, deploy manager nodes 2 and 3 to create an NSX manager cluster. Like I said earlier, when we were talking about that, we're not going to have to deploy our managers frequently. This is often going to be a one-time thing, right? We're going to set this up, and that's our environment. But we need to go through this process. Now, the way our lab is set up, maybe it takes a little bit too long to actually do it compared to the value that going through this process provides. But going through this in a simulation allows us to do this quickly and efficiently and effectively, and you get to see the entire process. Now, something to remember with the simulation, something that I think is very critical to remember with the simulation, is this is not a live environment. So you have to read the prompts, the steps that we provide in the simulation. You have to read those very carefully to understand where the hot spots are in the simulation, right? When it says open Chrome using the icon on the taskbar, you have to click on the taskbar. You can't double click the icon on the desktop because that's not configured as a hotspot. So we want to be very careful about things like that. And we do a really good job, I think, of defining those hotspots in the steps of the simulation. So those are the 3 labs we're going to go through right now, right? 2 labs and a simulation. So go through those, work through the validation of the infrastructure that we've got, the live infrastructure, go through the simulated deployment of our second and third manager nodes. And when you come back, we'll go ahead and wrap this up.